So we're on to a specific subgroup of proteins known as enzymes. You can see enzymes pictured here, many different types of them, and there are many, many more. And they are very large, very complex proteins. More important question is, what do they do? The term that you need to remember when it comes to enzymes is the term catalyst. Enzymes act as catalysts in chemical reactions. And as it says in parentheses here, the word catalyst is essentially a synonym for helper. Enzymes help chemical reactions. They catalyze chemical reactions. You are alive because inside of you there is a series of chemical reactions going on all the time. And the combination of all those chemical reactions, basically known as your metabolism, is what keeps you alive. So enzymes catalyzing chemical reactions are of the utmost importance to life. What exactly does it mean that an enzyme is a catalyst? Well, it means two things. Number one, it drastically increases the speed at which chemical reactions occur. A lot of chemical reactions might take place inside of you without the presence of an enzyme, but they would do so in a much slower way, thus making you not as efficient. Number two, enzymes act as catalysts by lowering the activation energy of chemical reactions. If you look at the graph to the right, notice that there is energy being shown here on the y-axis, and there is time on the x-axis. If a reaction was going to occur without the presence of an enzyme in your body, notice that it would happen, but it would happen slower. Here is with the enzyme, quicker. Here is without the enzyme, slower. But also, as I just mentioned, enzymes lower the activation energy. Here's the energy on the y-axis. If you don't have an enzyme present, the reaction can occur, but look at how much energy it uses. The whole way up here. Whereas if you have an enzyme present in your body, that same chemical reaction, in addition to happening faster, only requires this much energy to occur. Activation energy is the energy needed to start a chemical reaction. Your body has to provide it. Your body has to provide this amount of energy. If you have an enzyme, you only have to expend this much. If you don't have an enzyme, you have to expend this much. So you can see the importance of an enzyme acting as a catalyst in a chemical reaction. It saves you both time and energy. It's pretty good. One of the other things that you absolutely have to understand about how enzymes work is that enzymes are specific. What does that mean? Well, you have a whole bunch of different chemical reactions that take place in your body, and each has a different enzyme. Each enzyme is specific to a chemical reaction. In other words, it can help perform that reaction, and it can help by lowering the activation energy and adding speed, but it can only catalyze one type of reaction. There's a reason for that. If we look at the diagram here, this big purple blob that you're looking at here is supposed to be an example of an enzyme. The enzyme, specifically in this case, is an enzyme called sucrase. Focus in specifically on this area right here, this sort of funny puzzle piece-shaped portion. That is known as the active site of an enzyme, and it has a specific shape. Over here, you have the exact shape that fits into that active site. In this case, it happens to be sucrose, and the generic term for that is a substrate. In other words, each enzyme has a specifically shaped active site to accommodate a specific substrate. In this case, the substrate happens to be sucrose. You should know that to be table sugar, a carbohydrate, a disaccharide one, and that is the only structure that will fit into the enzyme's active site, as you can see here in portion number 2 of the diagram. We're looking at what it's being referred to as the enzyme substrate complex. The whole point, of course, of the enzyme is to catalyze a chemical reaction. And so as we follow the chain of events over here, you can see that this disaccharide is being broken down, being digested essentially, into its 2 monosaccharide pieces. In other words, what this is really showing you is a hydrolysis reaction, the breaking down of a larger organic compound into smaller pieces. The beauty of this is that the enzyme does not get used up in the process. You'll notice this is just a big cycle. So when this is done doing its job, it can just grab another substrate and do it again and again and again. And it does it really fast, and it does it with low energy requirements. It's a big help to our body. The other thing worth pointing out here is probably the name of this enzyme. As I mentioned earlier, it is sucrase. Enzymes are going to typically be named with ASE at the end. So that should be an indication to you when you see a word with ASE at the end. Oh, you should recognize, okay, I'm looking at the name of an enzyme. And oftentimes, the beginning part of that word is representative of the substrate. So the substrate in this case is sucrose, and therefore the name of the enzyme is sucrase. A few things that are going to affect how an enzyme works, how well it does its job, are listed here. Let's lump numbers 1 and 2 together. It says that the amount of enzyme and the amount of substrate impacts how well the enzyme works. The reason that that is the case is because enzymes and substrates just need to bump into each other. They need to accidentally run into each other in order for the reaction to occur. So the more enzyme and the more substrate present within some particular area of your body, the more likely the two are to run into each other and therefore have the reaction catalyzed. Number 3 also should make sense with that as the backdrop. Temperature impacts the ability of an enzyme to do its job because as temperature increases, temperature being a form of energy, the enzyme and the substrate will move around more. As their temperature rises and they have more energy, there is more movement. The more movement there is, the greater the likelihood that the enzyme and the substrate will run into each other and therefore catalyze the reaction. And as temperatures get colder, the less likely that that is to happen because lower temperature, less energy, less movement, less likely to run into each other. What is not described here, however, is the possibility that increase in temperature leads to something called denaturation. In other words, what it sounds like I'm saying here is that, hey, higher temperatures are better. It will allow enzymes to work faster. Well, that is true, but it's only true to a point because each enzyme also has a temperature range. And when it starts to live in a temperature that is too high, that higher temperature will break down the structure of the enzyme. And once its structure is deteriorated, it doesn't have an active site anymore, and therefore it can no longer catalyze the chemical reaction. So too hot is bad, too cold is bad. In other words, there's a sweet spot in between where our enzymes work really well, and guess what? It's affiliated with our body temperature. We know that we maintain a homeostatic body temperature of something in the neighborhood of 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. There's a reason that that's so important. If you get too hot above that, your enzymes will denature. If you get too cold below that, your enzymes aren't moving around enough for them to work effectively. Either of those cases can potentially lead to death. Let's look at number 4 on our list here. That says pH. It wasn't all that long ago that we talked about pH. If enzymes have to work within a specific temperature range, enzymes also have to work within a pH range. Not long ago, I showed you a picture or a representation of the human body, and I showed you different places in the body where you needed to maintain specific pHs or pH ranges. This is why. The enzymes that are at work in those different areas of your body operate within a pH range. And so again, if your body would stray from that pH range, it would denature the enzymes present in that portion of your body. They would deteriorate. They would no longer catalyze the chemical reactions that are keeping you alive. And again, that's going to cause problems and potentially, worst case scenario, death. Here are a number of questions which I would like you to do a little bit of research on. What enzyme does your body use to digest lactose? What does this enzyme do to lactose? And then where is it produced?